Hey there, it's Mike Yao with Savage Kingdoms role-playing game and Fire and the Head Productions. And today we're going to talk about monsters. That's right. Perfect for the Halloween season, October, etc. So, sitting a little bit further back from the camera as usual, because I want to show off my Savage Kingdoms t-shirt. This is one of 3 designs that are out there now. Get yours if you haven't already gotten it. It's part of the Indiegogo, or you can order it on Bonfire as well. You can go on the website, savagekingdoms.net, or the Facebook company page, and order yours today. It comes in different designs. This is one of them. It's actually not my favorite of the shirts. Maybe you could see why. I mean, it's still cool, but I think the other graphics is a little cooler. But anyway, I still like it, and it's very comfortable, and they're very soft. And I like this kind of dark heather, as they call it. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. This video is about, as said, monsters and monstrosities, creatures in the dark and otherwise, both preternatural and supernatural. All right, so in tabletop, let's start off with this. So I'm going to make 5 points. I'm going to break, like I usually do, not usually, but have been often doing in recent videos, because it kind of keeps me on track, because I'll ramble and the video will be like 98 minutes and nobody will watch it. That's already kind of the case, but I don't want, at least there's a few people kind of enjoying these, I think. So break it down to 5 points, starting with almost the obvious. What is a monster in a tabletop role-playing game? So this video is particularly mostly for Savage Kingdoms 3rd edition, my game, but it can also apply to Dungeons and Dragons, which I also run, and have Savage Kingdoms. My setting also has a version of D&D as well that I'm working on, or Pathfinder, or Dungeon Crawl Classics, or whatever. Pretty much any medieval fantasy tabletop role-playing game. Really any tabletop role-playing game. Even in science fiction, you've got your monsters, you've got your alien species and things like that. So what is a monster, particularly in tabletop role-playing game, you might ask? Well, so it's generally presented as an adversary, right? A monster, by the very definition, I think it goes back, it's an old German or old Scandinavian word, I believe, monster. Um, it kind of fell out of fashion with me using the term monster. Like, I prefer to use creature or beast. But I'm kind of like getting back to it again. I think because like in back in the 80s and 90s when it almost became a joke. It's like, we're gonna counter the monster. We're gonna go fight some monster to get some treasure from D&D. So some of us would kind of almost make fun of that, even though we loved it. We still kind of made fun of that trope. So the term monster almost kind of became silly, and almost sort of childlike in a way. But no, I don't know. I kind of like it again. Maybe it's just because fall is in the air here in the mountains and Halloween is awesome. So what is a monster? To get more on track. So it is an adversary in general, but not always. So in Dungeons and Dragons, particularly, Gary Gygax made the definition of monster. It really included anyone other than the player characters, in a very broad case, right? In a broad sense. So even a non-player character, even a blacksmith in a town, could technically be a monster because he could be an adversary, um, or perhaps just someone to interact with. So not all monsters necessarily are adversarial, but that's the kind of the general take on it as far as early D&D, but also from the actual term monster, something that is often supernatural, something that's not natural, and can usually is mean and evil, typically, particularly in ancient fairy tales. Not always necessarily the case, but often. Some of the cooler fairy tales have kind of your almost like the creature that was thought to be a monster, and it turns out it really wasn't that bad. Beauty and the Beast is one of them, based on an old French story. There's hundreds of others. Even Elsa and like Frozen is kind of monstrous in a way. She's a heroine. She later on, but she's a little bit dark, or at least gray at the beginning, because she doesn't understand her powers, and she kind of goes off on her own, and she loses her temper sometimes and blasts people with ice and that kind of thing. So, in a traditional sense, a monster is an adversarial creature, but in tabletop role playing, particularly over the years, it's developed into, it can be whatever. You know, people have befriended monsters, they've charmed them, they've parlayed with them, they've understood them. At the very least, they've sneaked around them, avoided them. Something that probably needs to be done more often in tabletop role playing games, instead of always fighting everything. But you know, combat is fun. And I'm going to get to that in a second. Like I tried to make the creatures, I tried to design the creatures or monsters in Savage Kingdoms to have a little more kick than say average tabletop role playing games. I'm not honestly completely convinced I succeeded in that. I don't think I necessarily failed at it by any means, but I don't know. Some of them could have been maybe a little tougher than I thought. But in Savage Kingdoms 3rd edition, things are scaled back a little bit. So player character health in general is scaled back by 5 points. Uh, so and that's really the only thing that's kind of scaled back. So that alone can be a thing. I've seen it come up in playtesting. Savage Kingdoms 3, there has been more character deaths than in previous editions, even in this just short lifespan. So design goal achieved. Um, so that does 2 things. It does several things actually. So one, it makes the game more challenging / deadly, which I think most people, particularly mature players, would want. Nobody wants to cakewalk through something that's boring. It's like a waste of time. Um, Not nobody, but most people. And then it does another thing, so challenging and deadly, but it also does another thing, and it makes the term monster or supernatural creature or being more respectable, or respected, or respectable. There's a tendency in tabletop role-playing games for player characters to kind of get a little cocky. Part of that's fun because it's kind of fun. You want to play this cool hero, and you got these cool powers, and most of the encounters, you know, you're surviving or even winning quite easily. But I believe as a game designer and someone who respects medieval fantasy and old fairy tales and mythology, that a monster should be scary and it should be respected in a way. And to respect that, you have to kind of bring the goods, right? Um, so when create a monster, when statting it out, so to speak, you try to, if you're using a creature from mythology, then what I try to do is I try to stay pretty close to the lore. Now, the thing is, there's a lot of conflicting lore, which I think is kind of fun. When I've designed some of these creatures, I've sometimes taken the lesser path that's a little bit less known just to put a twist on them. There's a few that I took takes of my own, particularly the Dryad, which can turn people to wood instead of stone. I don't think that's in any lore that I saw. It's just kind of some weird thing I came up with. Um, and there's a few others too. There's not like a whole lot of ideas for. I wasn't honestly weren't I wasn't super creative with a lot of these creatures, but I think I did an okay job. But most of them I presented pretty much as most of the lore was. Just kind of brought it into the Savage Kingdoms rule set. You know how to interpret that lore through game mechanics of SK3. Um, so yeah, so that's a long way of saying a monster is typically adversarial, but not necessarily. It is something that can be challenged. It's something that's can be appeased. It can be even worshipped by some people, particularly cultists. You know, it's always fun to have a. My players know that I sort of like cults, and I like to come up with these kind of weird cults. It's probably my fascination with the Conan stories. There's always some kind of weird cult that worships snakes, or an offshoot of Set, or even worships flesh, or you know, just some weird or some weird scorpion man creature or something. So it gives you kind of a cool idea about a monster itself that's being appeased or worshipped, along with its cultists, which are more like humans, but then they're trying to almost be like the creature. They're kind of worshiping it to gain its power, to gain its understanding. So it almost gives a literal spin. You know, there's an old saying that man is the ultimate monster, or humans are the ultimate monster. So that kind of gives it almost a more literary definition of that with people like cultists or whatever, because they can be mind washed or power mad and that sort of thing. So anyway, this is number one. What is a monster? Kind of in a nutshell. All right, so I'm going to break down the different types of creatures in Savage Kingdoms 3. Number one is animals and gigantic animals. I'm going to turn to the bestiary in the SK3 Cool Rulebook. So it's right there. That's the cover page. Very cool. Again, Michael Scott Phillips, my graphic designer, did a great job there. And then we're into the interior there. So the bestiary in SK3 is broken down into 3 primary sections, which is something I did in the previous editions. I definitely want to do it again. And then there are different types broken out, kind of like in D&D where you have Fae in it, but our types are a little bit more broad and not quite as sciency. I find that slightly annoying when if a it's like my idea of magic. When magic and creatures, which are supposed to be kind of mystical and scary, when they're quantified into like perfect little categories, then it kind of defeats the entire purpose, right? However, from a gamist point of view, do need some categorization, right? Because there's certain spells or talents or other abilities or even phobias that run off of a particular type of creature. So the first type of creature in the bestiary is animals and gigantic animals. So it opens up with that. We have an Arctic bear. This is in the SK3 rulebook. Arctic bear, brown bear, boar, bull, domestic cat, so smaller cat, crocodile. Um, Probably should put the crocodile in the Savage East. Actually, now that I think about it, but anyway, it's there. Guard dog or war dog. Stats for a guard dog or war dog. Eagle, horse, riding horse, lion, mammoth. Yes, mammoths still exist in this setting, as do saber-toothed tigers, which I'll get to in a second. Panther, raven. I love ravens. Saber-tooth, as I mentioned. Giant spider. So now we're getting into the giant kind of category. Giant viper. Um, and some of the artwork is just kind of basic iconography that we found there. Let's see, common viper, so just normal sized viper, which can still be pretty deadly. Light warhorse, heavy warhorse or destrier, wolf, and a great wolf or a dire wolf, giant wolf. They're usually called great wolves in the setting, but basically they're giant wolves or dire wolves. And then those creatures are pretty well statted out based on reality as much as possible, within a fantasy setting and within trying to bring them into your game mechanics of your setting. But I think I did a reasonably decent job. Some things like great wolves can trip you as they bite. They can bite and pull you down because canines will typically do that when they attack, particularly larger ones. Regular wolf can do that as well, just not quite as effective because they're not as big. So some of the special abilities of the animals are things you would expect. Ravens and eagles can fly. Imagine that. Raven has a mimicry special ability. It can imitate natural sounds in the wilderness. Those of you who have ever been around ravens or crows, as I have, they can sound like a baby crying. They can sound like I've heard them imitate ducks and geese, which is really funny, actually, and other things too. So Saber-tooth, what else? Saber-tooth, yeah, saber-tooth tiger has a nasty bite. Has a tooth-breaking ability, which is bad for it, but the tooth can break off into a wound. It can be really bad. It can pierce armor. Mammoth has like a trampling charge attack. It can has a sweeping tusk attack. I don't know why I did that. That's tusk sweeping. Um, and what else? Yeah, crocodiles have the infamous death roll. Of course, I had to stat out a death roll ability. Boars have vigorous frenzy, like it's really hard to kill them. They're not like they keep going until they're at their death threshold of health, which is negative half your health. They might suffer penalties before then, but charging tusk, Arctic bears are have good cold endurance, Arctic movement. Obviously, vicious claw and bite attack as does a brown bear. Um, yeah, so I think that's probably it. I don't want to spend too much time on natural animals, although they can be cool. So the next category of the bestiary would be supernatural creatures. So supernatural creatures is when you start getting into your demons, angels, dragons, elementals, fae, giants, gorgons, and undead. So let me touch on those really quick. So demon is most of this is like pretty probably obvious, but I'll touch on some of it. So demons are the denizens of the netherworld, the lower regions of the otherworld, the world beyond the mortal realm, sometimes called devils, nether spawn, or worse. Demons are the embodiments of true evil, almost always filled with lust, violence, and the need to cause chaos, disorder, and general corruption. It is said that even the most mortal soul, the most wicked mortal soul, cannot compare with the sheer evil nature of a demonic creature. So keep that in mind, Game Masters, as you're running them. And I'll get to a little bit later as well. Demons are categorized as lesser, greater, and lords. So this might matter in case a character knows a demon summoning spell. Um, and again, disclaimer: this is medieval fantasy. This is not actual demons, and this is just storytelling. Just want to put that out there. So there's lesser, greater, and lords. So And they're as per usual. So every demon that's statted out in the books, I think I might have missed one or two, but you can figure it out. And it even gives an example for in case it doesn't say in the stat block whether the demon is greater, considered lesser, greater, or lord. The way you look at it is that for game purposes, demons of CL7 or less are considered lesser demons, CL8 to 12 are greater demons, and CL13 plus are assumed to be demon lords. CL means challenge level, which I may touch on a little bit, also a little bit later on. Depending on time here, 15 minutes, not too bad. All right, then we have angels. So in the history of the SK world, demons and angels are members of the same ancient and essentially immortal race. However, some eons ago, likely during the Age of God, some demons began to turn from their dark and sinister ways, becoming an ascended form of their race, would become known as angels. These angelic beings were still greatly outnumbered by their evil brethren, but many of them were powerful or grew powerful in their decision to ascend to a higher sense of honor and morality. In fact, there is no such thing as a lesser angel, only greater and Lord versions of them exist. So, in a nutshell, what that just said, hopefully with my fast reading, you figured it out and stumbling reading. So, in Judeo Christian religion, as most of you probably know, one third of the angelic host were cast out of heaven and became demons, right? So in Savage Kingdoms, it's reversed. So you had all this sort of ancient race. They were all what the men now call, or humans now, or everybody now calls demons in the Savage Kingdom setting in the Age of Man. Was just all one race. But some of them were tired of torturing mankind, keeping them down and like causing chaos and disorder everywhere. Some of them were tired of that and decided they wanted to ascend. So basically, it's flipped around. So one third of the demonic host actually rose to become angels, what's called angels. So when you're game mastering an angel, keep that in mind. Like, yes, they're strict and they are sort of good and pure, but they're still they're still very. It's like a dragon that's there's still there should be a seedy power there. Don't you still don't want to anger them. You don't want to, yeah, don't want to anger them. They know their place. They know that they're greater than you, and though they're being cool and trying to help you, if you're if not cool back to them, they can smite you. You can be smitten. Probably could be smitten with them also. Um, so yes, note about angels. The next category would be dragons. So dragons, I know I've talked about these before. There's only a few left of named variety, those that are elder dragons or at least middle-aged dragons. There's only maybe 6 or 7 known true dragons left in the world, at least of some age. There are some younger spawn running around, young dragons, but they don't often live as much in this age. They have to kind of hide. Back in the Age of Dragons, what was it in the lore? This was 3,000 years ago, I believe, maybe 5,000 years ago, when dragons were more more populated. Yeah, um, they were obviously more common. So mankind was just beginning to kind of form, living in caves, and so humans were hiding from things, dragons and saber tooths and mammoths and stuff. Um, so think about in our real world, the age of dinosaurs would be in this world, Savage Kingdom's world would be the age of dragons. Um, so yeah, if you think about it like that, I think you're right on the right path. So, and then there are creatures associated with dragons. There's other types of creatures exist too that are akin to dragons, draconic beasts such as the basilisk, sea serpent, and a wyvern. Though perhaps not dragons in the truest sense, these beings are still relatively cunning, dangerous, and potentially domineering. Some believe that dragons first came from the sea, either from some ancient seaborne race or by way of a fallen star that struck the Dragon Sea, hence its name, the Dragon Sea, over 7 millennia ago. So, all right, so the Age of Dragons actually started 7 millennia ago. I think I would know my own lore, but apparently I don't. So, yeah, that's probably enough about dragons. They're cool and very deadly. Oh, another final note. So in Dungeons and Dragons, you have lots of different types of dragons that have different types of breath weapons. So in Savage Kingdoms, and you're free to create other types of dragons, but in the strictest sense of the lore, there really only are ice and fire dragons. Occasionally, there's a rare third one that I think I mentioned in the Elder Dragon stat block, maybe I think so, about a type that can actually that's like a storm, so it's suggesting that it might breathe lightning. And there's also a minor suggestion that there maybe one ever in existence was a counter that could breathe like an acidic sort of steamy acidic breath. So in general, really it's just fire and ice drakes, but maybe there's lightning and acid one as well. So yeah, but nothing like gas and vapor and that kind of stuff. Next, Fae, the next category of supernatural creatures, often called fairies or fair folk in the north, particularly the northwest, or even other folk in less commonality. Creatures of Fae origin are inhabitants of the other world, the mirror world between our mortal sphere and theirs. More specifically, they dominate the shadow world sphere. Um, no, wait, they dominate the region of the other world, perhaps the largest area of that reality. So, just real quick, so the other world is actually, or at least humans believe that it's divided up into the shadow world, which is kind of the main region of the other world. The nether world, I don't know why I put it up, it should be down. Kind of the lower regions, where the demons and horrible, twisted, corrupted people and beings live. And then there's a very small area called the overworld, or sometimes in certain religions it might be known as paradise or even the heavenly realms. And that's where angel folk live. And some believe, even if the gods are real, that some of the gods might even hang out there as well. So yeah, so Fae are pretty much as you would imagine. They are the fairy folk, particularly of Celtic mythology. Nymphs and satyrs, and well, satyrs are typically from Greek, but for our purposes here, they are Fae. Will-o-wisps, which are also undead and Fae, and less common Fomorians, goblins, hobgoblins, redcaps, etc. So, and she obviously are probably the more obvious Fae folk. Um, yeah. Um, Fae creatures are harmed by cold iron weapons. So I've used that lore. A lot of games have. It seems like D&D Fifth Edition sort of got away from that, but it's fine. But so, and it's been interpreted in different ways from different authors through history, from different sources I've read, and even fantasy literature, where some people believe that what it meant by cold iron, if you actually take it back to the original Celtic source, it might have been describing true iron, or also hard iron, meaning that it would be steel. So some authors have made it, and perhaps rightly so, where steel, like true steel, that's iron mixed with graphite, and to give it that extra edge and durability, is what Fae are more harmed by. But I've gone the other route, and I've seen other authors do this too, where cold iron interpretation, in my interpretation, or at least through Savage Kingdom's interpretation, is that it's not touched by fire. It's not fire forged. It's literally wrought iron that's like hammered out. It's a pain because you can't use fire. And the fact that fire hasn't touched it is what does the additional damage to Fae. So a deeper meaning that in the other world where they're from, the shadow world particularly, um, that stands to reason that that's not how they forge weapons there. And so, because why would you forge a weapon that hurts you extra more, right? So that implies that in their realm, that's not how they use everything is fire forged. So if you forge a weapon that's not fire forged, then that's a little bit extra boon to them. So yeah, moving on to giants. Giants are probably obviously massive human-like beings from an ancient age that some believe are the direct descendants of some of the elder deities and beyond. In particular, such creatures as the Titans, the highborn of the giant races, those of somewhat higher mind and morality. They mostly dwelled in the warmer regions of the world, though when the age of man first came about, most retreated into the sea, desolate islands, or in faraway caverns. So those are Titans. True giants are. I don't want to read the whole thing, but uh, the giant kind that still consider themselves giants that aren't Titans typically kind of remained in the north or the temperate regions, and they eventually became frost giants and fire giants, and some even devolved sort of even lower and became trolls and possibly even Fearbolgs and Fomori too, even though those are also kind of Fey. They kind of cross over. Um, which is why humans and trolls can crossbreed and create trollborn too, because they've fallen so far from giant kind they're almost like just like big humans in a way, but they're still very violent and nasty and crude and stuff. So yeah. Next category is gorgons. So this is what I want to touch on before the most. So gorgons in our setting of Savage Kingdoms. They are mutated hybrid creatures of ancient origin. Most scholars, especially those from among the Pridonian peoples, agree that Gorgonic beings were first created by the fallen god Gorgothon, who, being thought stillborn at birth, was tossed from the divine palaces of Rodon into the raging sea, only to eventually wash ashore, half alive, on what is now known as Golgotha. It's the term Gorgon and Gorgothon. Here, as legend states, Gorgothon was nursed back to life and began in his boredom and wickedness to craft forbidden offspring from various forms of wildlife as well as men. Thus came forth harpies, hydra or hydrae, manticores, medusas, minotaurs, and more creatures corrupted and mangled with the physical parts of others. So that's what a gorgon is. Basically, it's a fantasy version of a mutant. So that explains why some will have a human head and like a snake body, or a human body and snake hair, or have multiple heads. And sometimes when the head's chopped off, another one grows forth, or as a lion body with a twisted human face, but also massive bat wings with a scorpion tail, stuff like that, or a minotaur with the head of a bull and the body of a humanoid. So that's how they came about. So Gorgon is, in Greek mythology, is just a type. Medusa is one of the Gorgons. So Gorgon here is a little bit more expanded into like a category of creatures. Interesting. Lastly, we have undead. Undead are not alive in the true sense of the word, hence the term undead, though they not entirely deceased either. These are the waking dead, or the re-risen, epithets often used to describe such horrible animated corpses such as animated skeletons, draugr, and zombies, or worse still, those with a modicum of intellect and a driving will to destroy the living and dominate the world of men. This latter category, that some might call greater undead, and such foul things as ghouls, grave wights, vampires, wraiths, and more. All right, and then it goes on with a little bit more. It talks about so undead. Some certain undead creatures are only affected by silver. This is not super unusual, particularly higher undead like vampires, but even lycanthropes, which are not undead, but silver, because it's moon metal, still affects them even more. Or in some rare cases, pure water, sunlight, garlic, or the presence of certain holy icons, particularly those of Saint Palladio or Signa, can hold back undead creatures. Certain incorporeal creatures are bound to, or that are bound to a specific area or object, or they might not be able to cross running water, among other supernatural flaws. Creatures not meant to be will almost always possess a weakness or two for heroic opponents to potentially exploit. Yeah, so that's undead. Nothing earth-shatteringly different from Savage Kingdoms. I think maybe I pulled some of the more obscure lore about not being able to cross running waters, certain undead and stuff like that. I kind of wanted to play with, and feel free to, as a game master, to do that as well. But for the most part, it's fairly standard right there. Right. And then there's stats for an animated skeleton. Again, this is a supernatural creatures area, part of the book. Animated skeleton, a middle-aged dragon. They have fiery breath and terrible presence and fire resistant stuff. Young dragon. Then we have elementals. We have air elementals, fire elementals, earth elementals, and water elementals. So a note about elementals, because I didn't break that category down in the book like I should have. I'm probably going to do it in the Savage East if I ever get around to it. So elementals are, I might have spoken on this before in case I haven't. So elementals in D&D, in the D&D multiverse, come from their own plane of existence, right? The elemental planes. So there literally is an elemental plane of air, an elemental plane of earth, an elemental plane of fire, an elemental plane of water. I didn't go that route with this. I liked my cosmology the way I had it, and I thought it was a little neater and maybe slightly more simplified. So elementals and Savage Kingdoms actually come from the mortal world. So, which is why when you summon an you'll see, if you know the elemental summoning spell your character does. You have to be near a source of. So you're literally like, if you have a brazier of fire going, or a fireplace or hearth going, that's where you have to summon the fire elemental from there. A pool of water, you have to summon the water elemental from. And so, and the reason being is that, so maybe in D&D you would say that's because it's a portal to that realm, which I think is cool. That's actually legitimate, cool lore. But I wanted to, again, turn it around. So in this case, when you're pulling it from the fire, the water, or the air, or the very earth, you're literally animating that bit of element and infusing it with a temporary spirit. So That's basically what it is. So they're almost like, and that's why they're not very intelligent, except for the elder ones. So there's lesser, greater, and elder elementals. And you'll see the stat block of the elders. Their intellects start getting up to like average human levels. So that's when they're becoming that spirit is burning. It's an intelligent spirit that's in them. Whereas in the lesser ones, it's just very temporary, and it's like it's gone after the spell ends or the creature's destroyed or whatever. Just want to touch on that. Fomorian, there's stats for a Fomorian. They are both Fey and Giant. Those are the twisted, ugly. Sometimes they have 3 limbs and like 3 eyes and two heads from Celtic mythology, particularly Irish Celtic. Then we have Frost Giant, cool Ghoul, Gobbling or Goblin, but in the north are typically all Goblings. I was just trying to be different. Goblin King stats, Hellhorse, also known as a Nightmare or Demon Steed. Hobgoblin, distantly related to goblins. So Hobgoblin in the world basically means a greater goblin, basically, or devil goblin. Hobgoblin War Captain, Manticora. So which is like a manticore, but has a bit of a stinger. But some 1 in 3 it says have tail missiles, more like the D&D version one. If you want to do that, if you really want to be creative and really nasty to your player characters, you can have both. It shoots tail missiles and has a venomous stinger. So Minotaur, some might say, but I think it is Minotaur. Red Cap, which is a horrible, evil fairy that their claws can slash through almost like most armor. Shadow Wraith, very cool, undead. And there's several types of wraiths in Savage Kingdoms because I'm a big fan of wraiths. And so there's shadow wraiths, wood wraiths, and ice wraiths. But there could be more. But those are like the ones that have been statted out at some point or another. Troll is the next one, and then we end with zombie. So this is where we are in the book. Very end of that, and then we start into, there's a picture of a male warrior, a human warrior there. And the reason why is because the last section of this area is NPC templates, and this is probably where I'll kind of end the video. So NPC templates. So I want to start by saying, as I have a note here that I don't want to skip over, that, and I should have mentioned it back in the point number 1, what is a monster? So in Savage Kingdoms, because I did base it largely on typical sword and sorcery, even though it's not exactly that, but that's kind of the core. Humans or human adversaries are your main adversaries, your main enemies, your main opponents. So in that sense, this is the core Savage Kingdoms. Of course, you can do whatever. You can make supernatural creatures be more common, but I don't think they'd be quite as supernatural in that case. But your mileage may vary. So bandits and brigands and mercenary companies that are bored raiding the countryside, even friendly merchants or even not so friendly merchants. Merchants are trying to rip you off. Pilgrims, priests, wandering sorcerers. These can all be. These probably should be slightly more common than like monsters or beasts. Because you can do so much with them, and it also helps your world building. It shows that it is a human centric setting. So if you're touting the world to be human centric, and then they hardly ever encounter anything like that, then you're kind of going against what you're saying. But again, you can adjust it the way you want to. But the way I sort of wrote it was that it's fairly human centric. Now I run a lot of games for kids, from like 10 to 15. And they're awesome. But they, in general, prefer, because they like monsters. When I was that age, particularly 14, 15, 13, yeah, I liked cool monsters and just any kind of creepy monster thing. So you might want to, if you're running games for kids, you might want to include more actual monsters and maybe less humans because they're not usually as interested in like political intrigue, and they don't often have enough life experience to kind of know what some of that is anyway, some of the deeper stuff of that. So yeah, so just it's always up to you, the game master. It's always about reading the room and sort of knowing your play group. So anyway, and after that little side note, NPC templates. We have an Eridornian Knight Errant, which was that photo I showed you. The reason I called them templates is because you can just pull this what they are. You can pull them out. It says statistics for common and not so common NPC archetypes. Most of these can be found in just about any part of the known SK world. Then it goes right into the stat blocks. Eridornian Knight Errant, Brigand, typical Brigand. Um, let's see, a commoner, a blacksmith, and then there's different types of commoners. We have blacksmith, merchant, farmer. So, because a lot of people ask, like, what, can I just get the stats to like a basic farmer or townsfolk? And I think a lot of times in RPGs that kind of gets skipped over. A druid priest, an initiate druid or druid priest, Laurentian legionary or legionnaire. That probably definitely need that. Norrish berserker. I actually meant to include Thoraki berserker, but for some reason it didn't make the. I don't remember editing it, but I guess I did. Norrish berserker, priest of Agathon or Argathon. They're like war priest, priest of Pridonis, an initiate. So the cool thing about the templates, particularly the priests, is that there's stat blocks. So it gives you the initiate stat block, but then if you look at the bottom of the stat block, it says advancement, and then it gives you adjustments for an adept, a high priest, and a grand templar in the sense of the in this case, a priest of Agathon. But all of them do that. The priest of Pridonis gives you the basic initiate stat block, and then there's adjustments made for an adept, a high priest or rank, and a magus. That way you don't have to include all these different stat blocks. So that was kind of one sort of thing I sort of added at the end. Truthkeeper monk initiate, and that's where we end because I didn't want to make the book massive, so I didn't include like tons of monsters and templates, but there's a fair amount. Truthkeeper monk. So those are the priests of Saint Paladir that are more like monastic monks than they are like urban priests. So uh, yeah. So I think that will about do it at 36 minutes. So I may do a part two. I have in my notes that I may do a part two. It depends on the popularity of this video. There's not been a whole lot of people watching, but those of you who do watch, I really do appreciate it. Hopefully you can learn a thing or two for somebody who's been doing this for a while. Share and like the video, subscribe, all that stuff, so I can make this kind of worthwhile. Yeah, so if I do a part two, I'm going to cover how challenge levels work with monsters and go over some of their various abilities, such as their aura, fear auras, poison and disease, and grappling people, swallowing people, knocking them down, just kind of cool stuff that monsters can do in SK and other tabletop role-playing games. So, all right, guys, that's going to do it for me. Thanks for following along. Talk to you again soon.